Well, thank you everyone for making it out here to the last session of the day. Thank you to SmartBear for putting on this amazing conference. Over the last 2 days, my head has just been filled with so much information, and the collaboration that I've had with many of you, some of you that are in the room today, has been fantastic. And I know it'll extend much further past today and hopefully into SmartBear 2018 as well too. So as Hirsch said, my name is Richard Feller, and I am the owner of Hedgehog Technology Services. My company has been a SmartBear client for many, many, many years. So when they announced that they were doing their first user session, we were just all excited at the office. We couldn't believe it was their first one, actually. So we started tossing around ideas and said maybe we should speak at the conference since we use SmartBear products, mostly from the deploy/monitoring side, so the alert side of the house. But we are constantly pushing out to our clients the use of all of the design and development and testing tools. We're pushing that towards them so that when they're working in their environments, they would then bring it to us. And then when they're live in deployment, we have monitoring that seamlessly integrates. So we are very hugely connected with SmartBear. So I started to toss this around the office around, and said, I'm going to speak about how it just makes sense to do transactional monitoring and quality testing, et cetera, et cetera. And the finance person at the office said, well, it also makes sense because we actually do make a good amount of money off of it as a managed service provider. So that's kind of where we came up with the make sense and make sense part. And after a little bit of a chuckle on that, it kind of started to write what I would be speaking about today. So I wanted to also then talk about best practices. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't the venue. As you can tell from the vest here, I'm probably not the guy who's sitting in the back coding everything. But I've heard best practices spoken probably 50 times over the last 2 days. It was in the API testing session, and almost every session today, we talked about best practices. So I sit on a number of groups, and I work with a number of different industry associations where I actually work specifically on best practices. So I do want to touch on that a little bit. And it's not in my presentation, but I'll add it on in the end there. And you'll also find that I'm not a big PowerPoint person, so you'll see a little bit of slides, but not too much from there. But I think that as we look at API testing and quality testing, you'll see from some of the user experiences that I've had with my company and some of the testimonials that I'm going to give, you'll see why we really feel like it makes sense and makes sense. Yesterday we had all the learning. Today we've the keynote speaking to hearing about all the different products that SmartBear has available. We've also seen some challenges, we've seen some hurdles, we've seen implementation methodologies and everything. And I'm going to talk about it from a bit of a higher level, but it will show you, why I feel that we need to dispel that myth that Hirsch was talking about, where that testing is not something that's needed. And so I think we'll come to that, come full circle on that one. So as I said earlier, I'm the owner of a managed services company. We do cloud and hosting solutions, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. We work primarily with nonprofits and associations. So if you know this group, they have some very complex issues. Some of it is tools that are available to them are generally given to them at some very low rate or some kind of a special nonprofit rate, et cetera. And those tools only go so far at some point before they've either outgrown or outlived that. So they have some hurdles that they deal with, but one thing's for sure within this group, when they find somebody that they trust, somebody that they know can provide them with something, real concrete and something that will really work for them, they latch on to that. So that's what we hope to be to our clients, and we do that through this whole suite of SmartBear services. So we recommend probably any number of SmartBear products and services to our clients on a daily basis. But we use two of them mostly. And as a company who uses AlertSite, mainly from our side, our clients just, they have different development needs, every single one of them. So we try and guide them as best we can from the development standpoint, and then we bring them over into the deploy and then the monitoring side. So we all know, I'm going to, again, some pretty basic slides here. We know that monitoring is essential from the cloud services provider section. And there's generally two questions that are asked when we're talking about that. Are the systems up, and are the systems healthy? So when it comes to the first question, are the systems up? Oh, and here, I missed all my slides. See, I told you I'm not very much of a PowerPoint person, but there's your sense and sense. So when it comes to are the systems up, there's some pretty basic ways of figuring that out. I mean, we all know that. When it comes to are the systems healthy, there's a few other ways. We have a number of different metrics. But then we start to get into the question of are the systems healthy, or are the systems performing their desired function? So this is not a black and white answer. And how do we answer this question when there are so many different variables? Well, we do this by looking at some of the performance metrics and taking it to a whole different level than some of the other hosting companies. Traditional monitoring makes sense here. And we know that quality testing is necessary as well. And as that trusted partner to our clients, they expect us to bring this to them. So if I'm going to deliver these quantitative answers to my clients about the performance of their systems, I need to not just monitor, but also test their APIs. Let's see. So when it comes to how I'm going to do this, I do this through another number of different methodologies. So generally, if we're working through clients with their development stage, we might use a combination of, let me fast forward here, we might use a combination of different services. So, forgive me here. So if we're doing functional testing or testing at the code level, we might use, one of these products. If we're using load testing, we might use load UI or performance monitoring. But no matter what the case is, we're going to be implementing a series of these quality tests and performance monitors that will ensure that their systems are not only up and running, but performing their desired function. So here I have two examples of how we do this today. And these are going to be customer examples. And these are real-world scenarios. So as I mentioned, we host a number of large associations. And generally, associations know exactly what their user base is. So for example, if they have 300,000 members, they know that they're probably going to have 300,000 potential users. It's pretty straightforward. And based on years of traffic data, they know about what their traffic is on a given basis. But here's where it gets a little bit more complicated for them. Their membership renewals happen at the same time for all 300,000 members. So when I say the same time, it's not all at one moment, but over a course of about 2 months, 44 days, let's just say when you take out weekends, they are a business client. So when we look at that, that's 300,000 renewals over 44 days, about 7,000 renewals a day, and maybe about, in an 11-hour day, 12 to 14 renewals every minute. So that's a lot of math to work out, but it kind of gave us a framework of coming back to our client and saying, look, we have some initial numbers here. We can do some load testing. So we kind of picked a plan with them, and we said we're going to go at about 5,000 simultaneous users, and they're going to go through the entire renewal transaction. So we wanted to see if it would meet that performance metrics and not fail. So we used SmartBear's Load UI to simulate a number of, let me see where that comes, there's the mathematics, to simulate the specific number of users to their renewal API, giving them the answers that they needed to know that their renewal API would work constantly. Now, it goes past that renewal stage for this particular client as well, too, because as you look at the renewals, they happen throughout the year as well, too. So we also have to make sure that this is functioning throughout the year, not just over this 2-month period. So again, we utilize AlertSite to monitor the transaction, make sure that the transaction is healthy, keeping it up and functioning. So we do monitor the transaction for them, make sure that everything works, and it kind of gives them a good idea of the health of their system, but also that it's performing their given function. But this is a clear example of where the API testing and the performance monitors that we put in place makes sense for them. So here's a little great vision for them. Any missed renewal is missed revenue for them. And in turn, my company is a managed service provider, and I'm providing a service, and as I'm providing a service, that's revenue for my company. So it makes sense for my clients, it makes sense for me, and that's exactly what we do. The second example, I think, is going to speak more to the group that's here today, because it is more in the development stages of things. So a client of mine who hosts a number, or who has a number of different development campaigns going on, brought a client to us, and they were very frustrated. So this client had a major hurdle to overcome. They built a system, built it in development, entirely in development, and launched it out. So they didn't do any load testing, they didn't do any functional testing, they just said it works in-house, we're ready to go. So I think it was maybe about 5 to 10 developers. So this system had never seen anything under any kind of load. And so they didn't see any issues with it. So they were ready to deploy. Now they were deploying the system to tens of thousands of users, but the user base was broken into 2 different groups. One group was particularly larger than the other. I think it was teachers and students. So what they did was they launched it out to the teachers group, which was a little bit of a smaller group, and instantly the application crashed. It couldn't even handle anything under load. So they came to us. It was a scary proposition for them, and we didn't even know where to start. We had no idea what this was. We looked at it from an infrastructure level, and as they were looking at it saying, what is that threshold that broke this for us? So when we found that from the infrastructure level we had no issues, we went right back to the code. And when we went back to the code, we did it in a little bit of a different way for them. What we did was we kind of came up with a plan where we took 5 of their most actively called APIs, for example, and we took those and we simply we threw them into a transaction monitor to see where any of the holdups were. We in turn took that data and reverse engineered it, giving them the ability to then go backwards and actually do functional testing and do real code testing before they go to market a second time. So we gave them these tools, and hopefully it will help them alleviate some of the pitfalls that they ran into the first time around. So now that they have the proper tools, again, we'll come back to it with load UI, et cetera, and we'll do things. But when we have these things like test server and test complete that can actually motivate them to come to market with a better product, we think that as they launch it out, they'll be much more successful the second time. So again, this functional API quality testing makes sense even more now because the problems they have could have been alleviated. So hindsight being 2020, we know this, but we were able to come to them as a trusted partner and say, these are the tools that you need. And on our partnership with SmartBear, we feel like they have everything they need to successfully launch out their product. So as we look at it, some of the tools that we've recommended that they use and that we've implemented for them run the gamut of everything that SmartBear offers. And of course, at this point, what we're looking for is that after this testing, they're going to save some money because they won't have to redeploy, but they're also going to come to better with a better user experience product. And then again, the equation is the same thing for us. As a managed service provider, we make money when we provide these managed services. So it kind of gives us that basic sense and that we are doing exactly what we think makes sense. So these are some of my testimonials from a customer standpoint. They're very high level. They're not as specific as we're talking, but they're real dollar testimonials. They're real savings. They're real world examples of how the testing that we're all doing here and that we've learned about all week is put into play in a developed and in a deployed market. So I think that this will help dispel the myth that this is just something we might be doing or something that should be casually done, and actually make this a necessity when it comes to market. And I think one of the questions earlier was, where will we see ourselves in 3 years? Where will we see ourselves in 3 months? I'm hoping that we'll find that this will become more than just recommended, process. So on that note, I would say that I'd like to kind of transition for a second, and I'm going to go into talking about best practices, since that was something that was really talked about here, and I really, really wanted to talk about, and I wasn't sure if it was the right venue. When I'm not doing my job at Hedgehog Technology Services, I'm fortunate to work with a number of respected association groups, industry associations, and one of them in particular, I was co-contributor to a best practice document on global best practices for the cloud and hosting industry. So it's a document that we put out to everybody saying, here's what you should be doing if you are a cloud and hosting provider and if you provide services along that line. There's a lot of information in the document. It's huge, 60 some odd pages long, and it goes over everything from infrastructure to software as we move on and everything. But in the future that we face with some of the threat climates that we're looking at, documents like this are always going to be expanded. So I feel there's room to grow this best practices, and who better to define that than this group right here, the group that's actually doing the testing and the code development, et cetera. So I really feel like as we move into the future, best practices for API testing and API quality are going to come from a group like this. And again, who better than SmartBear, which I believe is one of the leaders in this marketplace, to kind of head that up. So as I was saying, many companies are fraught with these different types of hack attempts and DDoS attacks. We've talked about them. I think probably talked about Equifax in almost every session this week. And initially we thought it was just large organizations like far left or far right were the only people that were going to be, susceptible to these types of attacks. But that's not really the case. And while I've hosted my share of major political campaigns and they've had their share of SQL injection attacks or whatever, and we look backwards and say we should have done this or we should have done that, it came to me the other day where a colleague of mine, a friend, said, my son's archery and rifle team's website was DDoS attacked constantly over the last 6 months. And I couldn't understand why that was, and it was costing them a lot of valuable volunteer resources, and then of course the headache of moving websites and everything else. And this is only going to keep growing. So as we go into details about things like, well, do you use firewalls? Do you use intrusion detection services? And what is required? What is just recommended? I think that when we look at functional testing and load testing and security testing, when it comes to best practices, should some of this, be a requirement and more than a recommendation? Now, a local high school sports team is not, a life or death matter, but is there a case where it could be? And forgive me, this will be my last kind of customer story that I have. For many years, I hosted the website for Amnesty International. And Amnesty International, all of their websites, all of their hosted technologies. Now, this is back in early 2000s. So we don't have all the technology back then that we have today. And even if we did, we didn't know about it. Excuse me. We didn't really know about it. And I think load testing companies were just coming to market at that point as well, too. But many nonprofits like Amnesty had limited tools at their disposal, especially compared to the money that they had allocated for these projects. The other thing is, back in 2002, a lot of websites were still owned by the technical staff and not the marketing staff. And as the marketing teams and as the sales teams started taking over websites, they were becoming much more prevalent. So sometime in 2002, one of the projects that Amnesty was focusing on was aimed at saving the life of a young woman named Amina Lawal. And she was set to be stoned to death in Nigeria. Now remember, this is 2002, so we're not talking 500 years ago. We're 2002. So Amnesty International, one of the largest human rights organizations in the world, had the goal of saving her from this punishment. And how were they going to do this? They wanted to get people to take action. Well, at the time, taking action was generally just filling out a web form and going to a website, filling out a web form, and that was considered taking action. At the time, the data would then be processed in a database, and then it would be reformatted into a letter that would then be sent to the Nigerian government appealing for Amina's life. So you might be thinking, well, that's pretty archaic. Well, again, go back to 2002 and also understand that we're dealing with another country that doesn't have the same internet capabilities. So we don't want to send over data files and data stores of information to a country that can't accept that. So we're really talking about printing out letters and sending them over to the Nigerian government and asking to spare, this woman's life. So this web form collected the data, and it worked perfectly on any given day. If you just took, any given day, everything was fine. You would process the web form. It would complete the entire transaction from start to finish. But we got a call. We got a call with about 6 hours notice that, excuse me, that Amnesty was going to be featured on Oprah Winfrey's television show. Now, at the time, she only had a television show. She didn't have an entire network. But we knew what that meant. And what it meant was they were going to get a lot of traffic to their website in a very short amount of time. So we knew as the hosting provider that their platform could not handle this. They weren't sure from a code side, but we were all pretty sure that it wouldn't be able to handle this kind of traffic. So we didn't want the lack of infrastructure or the lack of functionality of the API to determine whether a person could or could not have a voice in this decision. But again, things were different back then, and we were limited. We were limited by time, money, and access to certain things, especially access to knowledge, the knowledge that we have today. And that is not the case today. Today, we know that we have the necessary tools. The entire suite of SmartBear tools would have allowed us to know for sure what we could and could not have expected. We could have been prepared to handle the large number of take actions that came through. Now, nobody expected there to be 2 million take actions in a 24-hour period. That's the Oprah effect. If you do the math on that, that's 2 million in 24 hours, which is about 84,000 calls to the API every hour. It's about 1,400 a minute. So I say to you, if a company was going to launch out a product or a service, should the systems they build be able to perform those desired functions? From a business perspective, we leave it up to them. If they come to market with an inferior product, it's no skin off of our back, really. It's only their business that will suffer. And again, think about Equifax right now. I think if you signed up for the list to see, you've been given a date when you can then come back and submit. So they're staggering, they're structuring the inflow of traffic to this API. But what if an advocacy group or a similar wanted to take action on a particular issue? Should there be a set of best practices or in a place that make anyone who wants to take action take action? If they want to, should they be able to? Even if it's 2 million people in 24 hours that want to save a woman's life. So you can see our knowledge of the utilization of the entire suite of SmartBear services and products is crucially important to our clients. And what my company, maintains we sit in the deploy and manage, field and the monitoring field. We are still a managed service provider that wants to make sure that through the entire development and design phase, that we are more than just that infrastructure provider, that we're looking at these tools to be able to come to market and deploy with a proper product, and then something that we can monitor quite easily. So we feel that everything from the design and build phase through the API integration and testing all the way to the monitoring, it just makes sense. So I'm going to go back to 2002 really quickly, and we were able to get a miracle accomplished. We built a robust set of servers that were going to handle that traffic. And again, this isn't like spinning up virtual servers today. Back in 2002, you were actually physically building servers still. Virtualization wasn't even close to being widespread at the time, and Amnesty sure didn't have the technology or anything that complex. But we built an infrastructure that took the information in, held onto it, and then over a set period of time was processed through the API, allowing everything to not crash, but not lose any take actions. And in the end, it was a successful campaign. Amina's life was spared. Her sentence was actually overturned in 2003, and the campaign worked. So not every case that comes before us is a life or death issue, but it does show the power that we have to enact real change and results with the systems that we develop, the systems that we deploy, and the systems that we support. Our companies should be leading the way to dispel this myth that this is just something that doesn't need to happen, that API quality testing and API testing doesn't need to happen. We should be the ones leading the way to dispel that myth. And I want to make sure that my clients know that the tools that they need are available today. And we, as their trusted partner, can help ensure their success at every level by bringing in the tools that we have through SmartBear. And finally, I would like to see our industry come together and commit to using different levels of API testing and quality testing as part of a larger best practice so that it is more than just a recommendation or a good idea. I want to see it become, the standard for our industry. So that is what I have for you today, and I would be happy to take any questions or talk a little bit further about it.
Did you ever figure out who was DDoSing?
The team? No, we actually didn't figure out who was DDoSing the team. You have your ideas, obviously, but it's a successful rifle team, I will say that. So, we thought about that as well, too. We thought about that. Either way, for something that I do know, no matter how small or how big the site is, it's tough to move around. So it's a very big inconvenience for them.
Any other questions for Richard? API testing, monitoring, anything. He's an expert right here to answer all your questions.
Or at least say it so that I can edify myself and hope that I've been asked to speak with all these others.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I know it was from a bit of a higher level than this conference was set for. I know there's a lot more design development questions that need to be asked. But I think at the end of the day, from what I've learned in talking with the group over the last 2 days, is there's still a lot of work to be done to get people to understand that this functional testing that you do every day and that we push to our clients every day is something that's absolutely needed.
And you have to take it forward, not just functional testing. You need to use the right tools to take it forward, right down to monitoring and operation side as well.
Absolutely, and then continue to do that and on a daily basis to make sure that you don't roll backwards as well. Excellent. Thank you very much.